Hey, it's Paul. Before we get started, we need to make sure that you, the listener, knows that we are not mental health professionals and not qualified to prescribe therapies or therapeutic advice. We are also not your gurus and have no aspirations in that direction. We are simply two people who are trying to feel better and do better in our lives, just like you. And now, on with the show.
My dude.
What's up, Chocolate
Paul?
Sprinkles? How are you?
What's up, strawberry shortcake? Now I'm hungry.
What do you want to do this week for the podcast episode?
All right. Well, I had an idea I think is pretty good.
Okay.
I think I want to talk about codependent relationships. What do you think?
Huh.
I guess we don't have to do that. Like, it's cool if we don't. Like, we can totally do something that you want to do, or like, I see what you did there.
I lured you into codependent behavior, and you fell into my trap. That's good.
Clearly, I need to have some boundaries around you.
Clearly, we both do. So let's go ahead and let's do that codependence this week. I think that's a good thing to talk about.
I'm asking for a friend.
Asking for a friend, and we are that friend. So yeah, we should do the episode for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah. All right, I'll see you in the studio on Thursday. Okay. Bye.
Freedom over fame. Freedom over fame. Freedom over fame. The cycle stays the same. Freedom over cycle stays the same.
Have you ever felt the need to placate another person's emotional reactions in order to feel safe? Or have you ever felt as though you couldn't express yourself fully because of what other people would think about you?
Today on the show, we're talking about codependent relationships, what they are, how they're formed, how they manifest, and how we can learn to heal them. We'll dive into some theories addressing the tension between unveiling our authentic selves and our innate human need for love, safety, and belonging, as well as how codependent relationships block us from true connection.
So if you're ready for takeoff,
let's go.
That'll be a good beginning of the recording. Okay.
All right.
Hey, Nora.
Hey, Paul.
I'm Paul.
I'm Nora. And this is If We Only Knew Then, which we are pretty bad at ever entering our podcast episodes with saying who we are and what this podcast is.
We never say who we are, and we never say the name of the podcast. That's our marketing strategy. Our marketing strategy from now on is just
non-brand.
Mysterious. Mysterious is our marketing brand. What is this podcast? No one knows. Just listen to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, but if you're if you're coming back, thank you and welcome and hello. And if you're finding value in our podcast, share it with people you know.
Please do.
You might find because we would.
And it
love
always helps if you leave a review, especially on Apple Podcasts.
Make that a good review.
Yeah. A good review. Yes. Don't leave a bad review.
Yeah.
If you think about doing that, just refrain. But
exactly. And also, if this is your first time listening, welcome. And we hope you get some juice out of this. So,
all right. Housekeeping out of the way. What are we talking about today, Nora? And why are we talking about it, for God's sake?
All right. We're going to talk a bit about codependent relationships. Fun times.
Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot about these codependent relationships and what they are. The more I learn about what they are and kind of become aware of it in my own life, and I'm finding it extremely valuable for myself to build that awareness, so that I can have better relationships, but most importantly, better relationship with myself first and foremost. So I'm hoping the stuff that I've learned and that I'm talking about, and the resources that I've found on it that I can share with you, Paul, and whoever's listening, that it'll help you as well. So we're all about empowering each other here.
Let's start out by, for those who are not familiar, I mean, codependency gets bandied around a lot.
Yeah, I kind of feel like it's an umbrella term,
and sometimes it's used incorrectly as well. So can we start with just defining what, do you want to do that, or you want me to do it?
Yeah, I have one. Oh, this is one definition, and I did not come up with this. So I just want to say real quick, there's plenty of people who talk about codependent relationships, but if you're not aware of Gabor Mate, he's a fantastic psychologist, I believe. And he really brilliantly kind of breaks down a lot of these theories on attachment theory, which is related to codependence, and kind of his definition of it. So a lot of it is like coming from him and other people. So this isn't all
Hmm.
just like me off the top of my head. I want to give credit where it's due.
Right.
But what I think this is a great definition of, and the
Okay.
definition I came across is codependence is a person who invests their self-esteem in the behavior and emotional states of others.
Oh, I
Um,
like that. I like
yeah,
that. That's more specific than the general one, which is kind of a psychological condition that describes an unhealthy relationship where one person is overly dependent on another.
right.
That's also a good definition of it, but I like yours because I think it goes deeper. Could you do yours one more time
Yeah,
just so
yeah.
we can?
Again, that is, it's a person who invests their self-esteem
Mhm.
in the behavior and emotional states in others of
Mhm.
others.
Okay.
And really what that means is like I am not like it's the kind of bleeding of where I begin and you like where I end and you begin
Right.
in a
Yeah.
relational matters. I can speak. First day with this new tongue.
I like it.
Yeah. So I mean we can go from there, but is there anything you want to add to that, Paul?
No, I think that's a really good definition. Let's dive
Mhm.
in.
All
Yeah.
right. Yeah. And since we've defined what codependence is, at least of how we're gonna talk about it today, I wanted to kind of talk about how it's formed, how codependent relationships are formed, and this is where find I find this kind of fascinating and interesting.
Mhm.
And I think I could be wrong in this, but I'm pretty sure this is what is called attachment theory. And if it's not, I apologize if I'm like mixing it up with something
No,
else.
it's called attachment theory. It was
But
several people have worked on it in history, but it was originally I think late 1940s, early 1950s. The original
okay.
guy, don't have his name in front of me, but came up with it, and then several researchers after that added on to his theories.
Okay. Well, why don't you go ahead and like say what you've learned about attachment theory and what that is, and I'll tell you what I've learned.
Sure. Attachment theory is basically the idea that we attach in different ways to our caregivers when we're young, and those attachments can then manifest different behaviors later in life. I mean, that's kind of it in a nutshell. And then
Hmm.
relational attachments. Have you heard about attachment styles and things? That comes out
Hmm.
of attachment theory, but
Okay.
that's sort of later as a result of what your attachments were like when you were younger. So, for instance, a young child from 0 to 6 months doesn't really have any attachments. It's just kind of, it doesn't attach to one or the other caregiver more
Hmm.
than the other one. It doesn't have preferential,
There's no
treatment. Yeah,
prioritization there,
right,
right? Hmm.
exactly. And then it just progresses to where, okay, the child now at 6 months has a preference for one or other caregiver, and then after 9 months, it starts having preferences for secondary and tertiary caregivers like grandparents and other things like that.
Hmm.
And then it's all about how the child attaches to those people in its life, and then what the ramifications are later of that. That's
Got it.
basically the idea of attachment theories. I
Right.
understand it in
Right.
a nutshell. Does that jibe with what you?
Yeah, yeah, and again, like, so I mean, I won't go too far off in the weeds on the different styles of attachment because I
Mhm.
mean, we could go into that, but I don't know that that is what this particular episode of what I wanna get into and what we
Sure.
wanna discuss will like, it might kinda get off in the weeds a bit there, but yes, to everything that you were saying. Um, when I was listening to more of Gabor Mate stuff, and this is kind of like over time I've learned this, but, so the way he describes it is like as humans, we require enormous amounts of, like we are the slowest to develop, and like we, out of all of the animals in the universe as we know it, we need the need for attachment is the longest for us in order to
Mm.
survive.
Mhm.
So if you think of like a lizard, a lizard comes out of its egg and the mom is already gone and it either
Mhm.
survives or it dies, right? There's
Yeah.
no attachment to a parent there. But if you think about like a baby bird that hatches, it needs the attachment to the parent bird is like it needs it to be fed and
Yeah.
learn to fly and like, kind of socialize in the flock in that sense. So there's a need for attachment. As you go up the chain with like as you go down or up the chain, however you want to look at it, mammals require more attachment, and in particular humans have they're we're the least developed and most dependent young than any other like creature on the planet.
Mhm.
So if you think about it, like you can't just leave an infant out, it'll die.
Right.
It
Right.
needs to attach, it looks to the parents, the caregivers, the society, the community, whatever, for survival needs.
Right.
Right. So, and those basic survival needs include like connection and belonging and love and like not just the physical stuff. So it's like we require those things in order to survive.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
And one
there's
big thing about that when you're young too is the other part that got added later. By the way, the guy's name was Bowlby, John Bowlby, who was the
okay,
Bowlby, who originated the theory. One of the things later on that got added to that was also timing responsiveness to upset, things like that, where
okay,
a caregiver's time of response is linked to trust later in life. So that got added to the theory as well. Just wanted to bring that
all right.
and
Thank you,
interject that.
thank you.
Yeah.
So now that we've determined what attachment is,
Yeah.
like the flip of that is what we also need as humans, developing humans, is authenticity, right?
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is like learning to understand your body and its gut feelings about stuff.
Hmm.
And for example, like that's also a survival mechanism of like trying to find your authentic self, but also like really tuning in to listen to your emotions and your gut instincts. And if
Hmm.
you think about it, like early humans, if you're out and about in the wild, or even just now, if you're out and about in the wild and you're not listening to your gut instincts about what's going on around you and if you're safe or not, how long are you going to survive in the wild? You know,
Hmm.
right? Like,
Hmm.
so that's also an enormous need for humans, and in
Right.
particular, is like children who are developing, the need for authenticity and the need for attachment and those types of things. And so, where codependent relationships, the theory that it stems from is that it's if a child is met between their need for authenticity and to listen to themselves and to develop that skill set versus the need for attachment for survival, the tension between those two, the child is always going to pick the need for attachment over
Hmm.
the need for authenticity in order to survive.
Right.
And so that's kind of where the theory is that like we as humans start to develop where it's like I don't know where I end and you begin,
Hmm.
right? And like
Hmm.
and I think for a lot of parents who are not aware, or there's plenty of landmines for parents to navigate in like creating humans that are like fully developed, and to have codependent relationships, it's very difficult, and to some degree I think it might be inevitable.
Yeah, I
But
agree.
yeah, especially with like if you are an adult who has a child, or and you haven't dealt with your own traumatic shit, you haven't
Hmm.
dealt with your own needs, you haven't dealt with any of that stuff. A lot of that subconsciously can be translated to your children.
100%.
And
Yeah.
we can see that, like Paul and I have been talking a lot about this, about like people pleasing. And that's something that like I have watched my grandmother and my mother's relationship and the people pleasing tendencies in them, because it's like to be a good girl, like you don't cry, or you don't do these specific things, or like, that kind of got handed off to me, and not in an intentional way, in a
Yeah.
conscious way. But I'm starting to see this, especially as I like work on in therapy. And it's really the people pleasing thing comes from subconsciously a need for other people to like you, to feel safe.
Right.
Right? And the
Yeah.
thing that is interesting about that, if you're a people pleaser, you have people pleasing tendencies, and where you're like extending yourself over and over for other people, they're the benefit of them, so that you can be perceived as feeling liked and safe, is that they actually never get to fully love you, because they don't get to know you, because they don't know the authentic you, because you're never being authentic.
Right.
You're choosing
You're just
the
acquiescing somehow
exactly. It's
keep the peace, feel safe, feel loved, whatever that is.
and it's
Yeah.
a version of control, right?
Yeah.
And it's in its own way, it's kind of a manipulation,
Right.
and not like most people don't do it consciously, but it is another version of that. It's kind of like we got into this and we haven't released it yet, but we have an episode on narcissism,
Hmm.
and it's kind of like the same root of narcissism,
100%. Yeah.
right? It's just a different way of trying to fill a need for safety, by controlling other people by our behaviors and our thoughts.
Yeah.
I don't know am I making sense here? I don't know if I'm
Yeah,
like,
no, you're absolutely
okay.
making sense there. We should talk about like, and some of the roots of that are like in early childhood, the attachments are like a parent who's absent, a parent who's
Mhm.
abusive, a parent who, I mean, there's a lot of things you can read lists and lists and lists of things that would possibly contribute to that. But that's where that people pleasing tendency comes from, is some trauma where you had to keep the peace, or in some way deny
Mhm.
yourself in order to have a safe environment around you
Right.
or a loving environment around you.
Right, and that
Either
doesn't
one.
have to that often doesn't even mean physical safety. That means emotional
No, it
safety,
doesn't
like
have to see.
psychological safety
Yeah, a lot of
mostly,
people think of a lot of people go right to a physical abuse with that, right? Like,
Yeah,
well, people are physically abused, and that's why this is happening. It doesn't have to be physical. In fact, most times it's probably not physical.
it's more
Most times it's
psychological.
mostly psychological. Yeah, and it's
Yeah,
subtle. It's
yeah,
subtle. It's so subtle, in fact, that as you said before, Nora, you don't really know it, even that you have it.
right.
Sometimes it's
Yeah,
just so normal for you to get into that people pleasing mode to make sure everything is safe around you that you're constantly denying yourself without knowing. And you may not even know who you are after a while because,
right.
you're in that actor mode, you know.
Yeah, without even knowing it. And
Yeah.
so, I don't know, is there anything that, like, at least with, like, the attachment theory or people-pleasing stuff that like, I wanna give personal examples to kinda, like,
Well,
personify,
this is why it's so hard to leave a narcissist. I mean, you brought up
Mhm.
narcissists before. This is why it's so hard for people with people pleasing tendencies and codependent behavior to leave a narcissist is that they, the self esteem is such that they need the narcissist's attention in order to be okay while being completely,
Right.
manipulated by the narcissist at the same time. I mean, that's a real world example of it. I can't think. Are you asking for like a specific of people or?
Well, I mean, I even for myself,
Uh,
I know, like, as I build awareness around this, I can kinda look back and see, like, the different things in myself where, like,
yeah.
this has been just like, the codependent relationships have kind of been, facilitated,
Yeah.
and in my family. And like I said, like, I can kinda see where some of these threads come down from, like, on my maternal side, who
Yeah.
I love. I love my grandmother was amazing, my mom is amazing. They're all loving, caring, wonderful people. But I also know that there are certain things that, like, I picked up as a kid and then that got wired into me
Yeah.
of, like, a lot of times I feel like with certain relationships that I have, that if I am authentic about how I feel, in my emotional, like, relationship with them, that telling them will kind of really hurt them and almost, like,
Mm-hmm.
destroy them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I, like, sometimes have to decide what feels like the decision often for me is feeling like if I tell them how I authentically feel, I feel guilty because I feel like I hurt them,
Right.
and I'm not
Yes.
looking to do that,
Yeah.
or I can suppress that and then feel resentment
Right.
at myself
Yes.
and them that, like, I don't feel like I can be safely my authentic self around them,
Yeah.
right? And so it's like that tension gets, like, exhausting,
Yeah.
and I'm working on that in my own therapy and, like, trying to figure out, like, how I can express my emotions to someone in a fair way that, like, doesn't make them feel attacked. It's like the packaging has to
Mm-hmm.
be specific to them so that they can hear me,
Yeah.
and so it's a lot of, like, tightrope walking, and it
Yeah.
can be really exhausting. I don't know if
Yeah,
that
I agree. I have that in my relationships as well. My relationship with my mom is like that. We've gotten a lot better with it
Mhm,
because I've been really exercising my own wants and needs and prioritizing those lately instead of just rolling over. But I mean, we had an incident of it like this morning. I said,
mm,
well, maybe I'm going to stay down for an extra day in the Bay Area this weekend for MLK Day. Is that all
mhm,
right? And she's like, it's 3 days without any, but she doesn't have any friends up here. Right. So it's like,
mhm.
so she starts pulling the,
You feel
okay,
guilty.
okay,
Yeah,
that okay, where it's obviously not okay.
yep,
And then I feel guilty. And then I'm like, well, do I go or not? I mean,
right,
it's this constant, this tension in there. I can go and feel guilty, or I can stay home and feel resentful, one or the other. I mean,
and
there's not, or I
ultimately
can just let it go. And that's what I've been
yes,
really practicing this year is like just letting it go.
yep,
I'm like, I'm not going to hold on to the resentment for that. I mean, she has a point, right? She's an old lady who's alone on the weekend,
mhm,
right? So it's not totally manipulative on her part. But
right,
even if it is, I've got the choice about how I react to it, right? So I'm not
right.
going to react in that codependent way where I acquiesce and then feel resentful. I may acquiesce, but then I'm going to let it go. And that's
Yeah,
what I've been practicing a lot this year and working on in therapy as
and
well.
sometimes letting a guard go, figuring out how to let it go can be really difficult, but,
Oh
like,
yeah, yeah,
and
because resentment is serious
yeah,
drug. It's a serious drug. It's a
yep.
serious like, it can get on top of you. It can totally envelop your spirit if you're not
Well, and that's
careful.
like, and I can completely relate to that, and I'll also say that codependent relationships don't only show up in the form of people pleasing, right? And,
Right,
like, for example, I have a family member who, isn't thrilled how, like, another family member chooses to spend their time, their money, their life,
right.
essentially. Um And this particular family member that, like, doesn't like that, they often will have, like, a lot of opinions about the other person's life
Hmm.
without looking at their own, right? So it's, like, a lot of, like, judgment. It's, like, self-righteousness, right, really, which I also think is, like, a hell of a drug,
Yeah.
right? Of, like, what they're doing wrong and, like, how they should be and it's this thing where it's, like, they're trying to exert a certain control over the other person's lifestyle because the way that they choose to live their life makes the other person not feel fully safe because ultimately at the end of the day that person those two people love each other. They just
Yeah.
have a hard time with each other because it's the codependence relationships kind of, unfolding where
Yeah.
it's like, why do you care? Like, I mean, I get why you care, but why are you trying to control and tell them and dictate to that person what they should and shouldn't be doing? Like, that's they're a grown ass adult.
Right.
They get to live their life however they want, and if that makes you feel a certain way, take a look at yourself and,
Hmm.
like, clean your own yard, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's another way, so it's like these control freak way things that we kinda can fall into. It's all the same root. It's all the same kinda codependence root of, like, I need to feel safe, and in order for me to feel safe, I need you to live a certain way and to validate, these specific things so that I ultimately can feel safe, psychologically safe.
Yeah.
Same thing, you know?
I've got kind of a handy thing that I pulled up today about it's called the 10 Commandments of being codependent, and
I wanna
it's sort
hear
of a
these.
humorous way, but it might be a good way to introduce the audience to the rest of the behaviors that manifest themselves in codependent
Mhm,
situations. Okay, so one, you shall not put yourself first in any way for fear of appearing selfish or rude. Right, so that sounds familiar in some ways. Others shall
mhm,
dictate how you feel about yourself and your accomplishments. Yeah, that
mhm.
feels good. It feels bad, but I mean, it feels correct. Helping others is the foundation for your life. Neglecting yourself is the price you pay.
Mm.
Boundaries are fine for other people, but you're not allowed to have a choice. So lack of boundaries is something that we
That's a
talk about a
huge
lot
one,
in
right?
there. Yeah, in there. Yeah, you shall not be independent, for your worth is determined by doing, not being. That's something that I
Mhm.
talk about struggling with.
Yep.
I did last week.
Perfectionism, all that, same thing.
Perfectionism, like just activity addiction.
Mhm.
Because you're not enough. The feeling is that you're not enough by yourself just existing, that you have
Yep.
to what you produce is
You have
what
to
your
earn your
worth
worth
is.
and your
Yeah,
love.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Through other
Your
people.
your net worth is your self-worth, or your net product is your
Yep.
self-worth, either one, yeah. Asking for help is a sign of weakness and should be avoided at all costs. Boy, that's a big one in codependent, because
Mhm.
it's a trust thing, right? You don't want to put anything out there and then have it squat. You're just too
Yeah.
scared to do that. Yeah, you don't want it to be crushed by somebody because you're used to having it crushed. Uh, you shall not be honest about your feelings if you think they're not acceptable, right? So that's
Mm.
another thing, right? You're always
Yeah.
questioning yourself on whether what you're thinking, even though you feel it deeply, whether it's
Yep.
okay to say it or not. You shall not have needs in a relationship, because that shows what a good person you are. Yeah, if you don't have any needs, yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
That's a big form of people pleasing in relationships, right? Where
Uh-huh.
especially in the beginning forms of relationships, where you go in and you're like, don't need anything. I'll just go the
Right.
extra way. I don't need to say what my
Yep.
needs are. I don't like. I'll just make sure that everything's okay for the
I
other
wanna be a burden.
person. And yeah,
Yep.
exactly. You must take responsibility for others, because otherwise nothing gets done. You talk about that a lot.
Oh, man.
Oh
It's
man, that's a big thing in your
that's a
family, right?
well, it's a big thing for me, period, but
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. And the last
It's
one is you must never say no for fear of upsetting others, because giving is how you matter. Ooh, that's a big
ooh.
one too, right?
Yeah, and, like, yeah, like, for those are great, by the way,
Yeah,
thank you for grabbing
yeah,
those, and,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
each one of those, I'm like, "Ah, shit. Ah, shit."
yeah.
Yeah, so and I'm not saying that, like I think that the first key to kinda healing this stuff is building awareness around this, and, like, that's a great
Right.
way of building awareness is looking at those 10 commandments in different ways, and I kinda wanna dive into different things of, like, how those the root is codependence and how they can kinda play out in people's relationships, and, like, one thing I see, like, I nannied for years, I've been in, like, amongst, like, people raising kids
Yeah.
in intimate and personal ways, and not just with the people I nannied, but, like, family and friends and things like that, and first off, like, every person that I have been intimately involved in their family units, that trust and that, um, you know, are all with parents who are doing the best they can with what they know, just
Mhm.
like pretty much most people.
Right.
And so this is not a, like, you're parenting wrong. I don't want if anyone's listening who's a parent, I really don't want you to take that. I don't want your takeaway to be that, like, you're not enough or you're not doing enough because it's hard. Um, but I've seen, like, different versions of this of, like, watching the message that kids are kind of receiving because they don't have their brains aren't fully developed to be able to understand that it's not about them,
Mhm.
that their parents have, like, lives and trauma and things that have happened to them before they ever existed that they're working through, like, you
Right.
don't have that awareness as a
Or
kid,
not
you're
working through, as the case may
right,
be.
yeah, though, I mean, maybe that, but I've seen it in ways where it's like, okay, I'm gonna like, the parents, like, teaching the child how to do something, and it's like, "Okay, this is how you get better at it, and this is how you do it so that, like, you can be the best in your class, or you can be
Mhm.
the best on your team, and you can get your leg up," and a lot of parents, like, think that they're gifting their child, like, "You can be the best and, like, get ahead in life and feel I will feel safe
Mhm.
knowing that you have that control, over your world, by me teaching you how to be the best and compete." And really what is oftentimes, received on the child's end is that if I'm not performing in a peak way,
Yeah.
then I'm not worthy of full love and full
Right.
acceptance,
My existence
and
is not enough. I have to now perform
I have
to
to
this
earn it.
level
Yes.
so my parent will feel comfortable with my success rate and
And
not.
how do you think that plays out
Right.
with anxiety and depression
Well,
issues
yeah.
later on,
Well,
Like, I know you have
it's the whole carrot and stick thing that never
Yep,
worked ever anyway, right? I mean,
yep,
this is a little bit off in the weeds, but the carrot and stick thing, carrot if you do well, stick if you do bad, right? It's either punishment or reward either way.
mhm,
And like our development doesn't really, I mean, it responds to it, but in a totally negative way, either way it goes. Either we learn to cower, right? Or we
mhm.
learn to seek reward all the time and don't do anything for its own sake.
And you taught, so, I mean,
Yeah.
you have a better idea than I do of seeing how this plays out over time in children and young adults.
Well,
Can you speak
I
to
saw
that?
it really play out in the classes that I taught that were manual classes, like my stagecraft class and things like that,
Mhm,
where there's a real reticence to try anything new for fear of failure. Their fear of failure is so high that they
mhm,
would rather not try to begin with. They would rather just say, "I'm probably not good at that," and quit because
mm.
they have this.
Failure, the fear of
Yeah,
failure.
they have this fear of failure, and
I can relate to that.
they don't wanna displease me, they don't wanna displease their parents, they don't wanna displease the administration, whatever it is, but,
Mhm,
it all has to do with control, and when you're bad at something, you don't have a lot of control, and that's an
right,
uneasy place to be, and that all it feeds into their anxiety about general day-to-day life, but,
right,
um, you know, it's a it's a slow process to get them out of that thinking, I had to
right.
do it with a
It's a lot of
lot of
rewiring.
examples, a lot of rewiring, a lot of slow teaching, a lot of other
Mhm,
things, and and eventually, if you can get them to a point where like, ooh, if you can get them to do one thing, like I always had them, we didn't start making sets and stuff in class. We started making birdhouses, right? That was the
mhm,
thing, right? That was the first thing because it teaches them how to use all the tools in the shop. It teaches them, and they can paint it themselves, so they get a little creativity in there and things like that. Any design they want on it, and it's a small thing that each of them can be. I'll give them like 2 weeks to build and paint this birdhouse, which is a ton of time to do it. But that includes all the mistakes and everything else in there, and then they have this thing, and once they have that thing, then they have a little tiny bit of confidence, and they're like, oh,
yeah,
okay. And they start getting better with the tools. They start building scenery and other things like that. They start painting the sets, and then it's just then it's go time because they've got the confidence to try new things. And I don't ever care, didn't ever care if they ever went for a theatrical or
right. You just want
manual job
mhm,
whatsoever. All I wanted was that spark all the time, that spark of I can try it, and if he can do it, I can do it. If she can do it, I can do it. That's what I wanted to
that's awesome, Paul.
the most I wanted them to get out of it. I don't care if they ever went into theater or,
Yeah,
I wanted them to be able to fix their own house. I mean, that was one, fix their own house, do
there's
good for the
power in that,
community,
man.
learn skills.
Yeah.
And I've
Well,
got,
that's a
I'm
sorry, go
sorry.
ahead.
I just wanted the last thing. I just want to say I've got friends now who are like 3 or 4 years my senior who are saying, I wish I had the skills that you had. They just don't they never learned them, for one
Yep,
reason or another. They have other skills that I don't have, of course. I mean, everybody is like that, but these type of skills really build confidence with a kid
and
for sure,
self-esteem,
and
right? Like, that's the
self-esteem. Yeah,
thing.
yeah, especially
Those things
manual skills, and that's why it's so sad that it's gone from schools now.
right. Oh, I was gonna say with the thing with, like, I'm learning more and more about, like, self-esteem and confidence is, like, it's like you said, like, all you have to do is, like, start small. Give yourself some wins, you know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
some
Give
easy
yourself some
wins
wins.
so
Yeah.
that like it's not as overwhelming and you're not overwhelmed with this fear of like making a mistake, like the tightrope walking, right?
Right.
And those are skills. And like with any skill, they can be built upon. And
Right.
like that's the thing. Like we think of these things as confidence and self-esteem as inherent, and they're not. They are things you build over time with tiny wins
Yeah.
or sometimes big wins. And like the other thing that's been helping me with reframing the fear of failure, because I definitely have a version of that that
Yeah.
I I'm aware of in myself that I kind of am like trying to rewire. But one of the things that has been helping me about the fear of failure is that's rooted in codependent relationships really,
Hmm.
is this whole idea that there's no such thing as failure, only pivots.
Hmm. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah, it's like it feels a lot more empowering, right?
Yeah.
So it makes me less afraid to try stuff and fail at it if I give myself the permission that like, no, if it doesn't go the way that I envision in my head, you pivot and you figure out from there.
And not only that, there's framing as well that
Mhm,
helps everything. Like I had an antique store for 9 months, right?
mhm,
And then I closed it. So you could look at it from the outside and say that store was a failure.
mhm,
But from my perspective, I learned everything I wanted to learn about being a shop owner, and I got out before it started costing me any money.
mhm,
And to me, that's a complete success. I got a free education
mhm.
where I actually got a few $100 for my store every month, to
Right.
as a stipend for my college education and being a shop owner. And I learned all these skills about display and other things like that, and working with customers, all these
Yep.
things, over those months. So to me, it was a total success. So how do you
Mhm.
frame it, right?
Right.
Do you frame it like my store closed and I'm a loser, or do you frame it like I learned
I
everything
learned some stuff.
I
Yep.
learned some stuff and I did it without having to pay to go to a school to learn it, right? I just
Right.
did it. And the experience taught me those things. So now I have different skills. My
See
skills have been leveled up since having that store, but I don't have the store anymore. So how do you look at it? You know?
well, and you're well, 2 things I have to say about that. One is, like, we get to define what success means to ourselves
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
happiness and all that.
Yeah.
Like, and that's I was gonna like, so often we look to other outside source, but, like, anything outside of ourselves to define what success is, and,
Yeah.
like, you can see that all the time in our culture of, like, how much money you make is how successful you are and all. But if you're making billions of dollars and you have no time or energy to enjoy your family, your friends, your if you're spending your entire life about chasing the dollar to get to a certain amount so that you can feel powerful or you can feel safe or whatever the hell it is, the reason that you're like chasing that. Is that success?
Yeah.
Or,
Good question.
or is it like I still remember when I was moving from Chicago back to this area, and there was a client where I used to work who I didn't really know well. So it wasn't like someone I really invested in like their opinion. But I remember it like there was a conversation and I was like talking about my eventual move here
Hmm.
because we were in the planning process and it was like kind of in process. And the woman was like, "Wait, where are you moving?" And I was like, "The Philadelphia area." I'll never forget it because I was like, I thought I didn't take it personally because I thought to myself, "Wow, that really says a lot about her."
Hmm.
Where she was like, "You're moving to Philadelphia from Chicago? Isn't that like a downgrade? Like,
Hmm.
you usually wanna move else." Like, for her, it was like, you move to where there's more money and
Right.
more
Yeah. Yeah.
capital and more, and I was
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
like, No." Like,
Yeah.
I have roots there, my family's there. This like, success for me is what I determine, not if I'm, like, on the upward mobility of, like, making more, 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 because
Right.
there's always that's never gonna be enough,
Right.
right?
And
Like, that's
that showed her a little codependent streak as well by saying that,
exactly,
right? I mean, that's the
exactly, and,
thing,
like,
right?
that's the
That's the
stuff,
way
like,
she
I'm
looks
aware
at
of
it. Yeah.
100%, and she's looking at it as, like, my definition of success is the universal one, and it's like,
Right.
no, that's not how it works,
Well,
right?
it kind of is. Certainly more prominent than anything else because
Absolutely.
we're in this. I mean, this is why we're
Capitalist
talking about
hellscape.
this, right? I mean, yeah, we're in this capitalist hellscape, right? Where we've got a bunch of codependent people running around all the time, thinking they've got to produce all this stuff. I mean, I mean, it's a good topic for a podcast because
Yeah.
it's responsible for a whole lot of stuff we see going on around us.
Yep.
You know.
Yep. Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, that was the first thing. I'm trying to remember the other thing I was gonna mention about because there was the success thing and there was the fear of failure thing. I don't remember. But, yes,
That's okay.
these are the many ways that codependent relationships and how they shape us and, like, the need for attachment versus our authentic emotions and our authentic can play out. And I actually was thinking about this, and this is something like I think some of our female listeners might be able to relate to, because I don't know of any woman who hasn't been in this position. Um, but as a woman navigating our this world you often can feel very unsafe, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And you can feel unsafe in physical ways and psychological ways, all sorts of ways, financial ways, whatever it is. But I remember, like, watching a video with some guy friends, and this was in my younger years. They've gotten most of my guy friends have more awareness about this, but it was a video of, like, a woman who was being kind of, like, really hit on by either one man or a group of men.
Mhm.
And watching the body language and all that, it was like like, as a woman watching, I was like, "Oof,
Mhm.
this is like." We've all like, women are often in this whole dynamic with men that they don't know,
Yeah.
that are approaching them, and it like, the intention is there of, like, they wanna pursue some sort of, like, sexual relationship or whatever it is, like flirting or whatever the hell you wanna call it. Where women are like, they don't feel safe.
Yeah.
They're around men or, a group of men that they don't know, and they are trying to feel safe, and they're in their head strategizing in hyper fast time of, how do I make myself feel safe without outwardly rejecting this person who I don't want to be around, who doesn't make me feel safe? But if I reject them, will I end up dead, or like, in harm's way? Or how is this going to play out? So a lot of times women, this video in particular was this woman who was, like, kinda like, "Ha, ha, ha," laughing, but, as a woman, I could tell she felt very uncomfortable,
Yeah.
and the guys were like, "What? No, she likes it. She's laughing." And I'm like, "This is where our experiences are wildly different,"
Right.
because she is strategizing how to feel safe and is having to fun to these guys.
Right.
And what their perception is, because they're often not in that dynamic, is like, "Oh, she likes it," and to keep
Yeah.
going, right?
Yeah.
And this is like, again, it's the need to feel safe that is, like, I wouldn't say that particular is, like, codependent, but it's a way that these, like, you can see the dynamics of how these things play out
Yeah,
in
I mean, I can see
in
it directly being codependent. I mean, it's it's a concern for your own safety, and and that fawning behavior is something that is
Mhm.
going to make the situation all right. I mean, yeah, it's true, men. You're having fun, and women are performing a threat assessment at the same time. It's a
All
whole
the
different.
time,
It's all
all
the
the
time,
time, all
constantly.
the time.
When
It's
they're
exhausting.
walking, when they're talking to people, whatever it is how do I stay alive, or how do I get out of
Yep,
this situation, or what are the possibilities of this
yep,
situation? All those things. Is my drink drugged? Is like there's all kinds
mhm,
of things to think about in terms
yep,
of safety like that. Yeah, we
all
don't
the time.
we
Yeah,
don't have to
so
think about. Nobody's drugging our drinks.
well, I hope not. No one should be drugging anyone's drink, but, like, yeah,
Right.
the fact is, like, that I have several female friends that have had their drinks drugged and,
Hmm.
like, have been in that position, and, like, it's just, like, so wild to me that I'm like, number 1, I know multiple women that that's happened to just in my own realm, and how when I go out to public spaces, like a bar or something like that, that I'm going to bars really all that much anymore, but
Right.
one of my things is, like, that's wired into me, is to cover my drink. If I leave my drink, is to order another drink and not drink that.
Hmm.
How I hold my drink, like,
Yeah.
it's just it's
Right.
crazy. Like, I
It's a
have
lot of
to,
things to
like,
think about.
the way I walk down the street, if there's, like, a cattle chute, I won't walk in the cattle chute in the middle of in a walkway. I go into the street because I'm
Uh,
like, I'm not gonna get trapped in that, and, like,
right.
it's just constant assessing, and it's, like, quote, unquote, "street smarts," but, like, how do you think I had to learn that, of being
Right.
in situations where it's like, "Oh, shit," you know, because
Yeah.
it happens all
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, I just kinda wanted to bring that part up, but there are other ways that codependence shows up in our relationships, and again, most of them stem from our childhood,
Yeah.
and
How
assessing,
we attach to our parents, and how they treated us. Yeah. One way
or
or
how
another.
you
Yeah.
attach to your teachers,
Or
not just
teachers, or
parents,
yeah.
like the
Whatever
people in.
caregivers in your life at that point, right?
Exactly.
People you're supposed to trust.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
There's the whole, like, be a good girl, be a good boy, or, like,
Right.
boys don't cry. There's
Yeah.
another one,
Yeah, yeah.
like that kind of stuff where it's, teaching there. I mean, that's an ultimate codependent, and I think that is really for a lot of boys and men, is like this idea that if you show emotion other than anger, that
It'll make other people
you're
uncomfortable.
not safe
Yeah.
amongst other men, and it makes
Yeah.
them uncomfortable, or like, and to shut it down, and look how that manifests later in life.
Yeah. I mean, that is number one on the hit list of why I started a men's group, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and it's funny too, and this is also codependent behavior. I think there are still guys who will be like, we'll spend some time on whatever their issue is, right, in group,
Mhm.
which is great because I love it
Mhm.
when the guys just bring their own issues and I don't have to do a topic. And like sometimes you're just really in the thick of it, in the
Yep.
middle of a week and you got to talk about it. And I've had, several people take advantage of that and they were the best groups that we've had. And then afterwards apologizing for taking so much of the time.
Mm.
And I'm like, dude,
That's the whole reason you're
yeah,
there, right?
exactly. That's the reason we're here. And like, whether you know it or not, like you helped everybody in the group by being
Yep.
so authentic and so open and so honest, because that's not something we as men do when we're together. Right.
Right.
So it's natural to want to say you're sorry about that, unfortunately, for most
Mhm.
men. But I'm trying to get in the group. I'm trying to get where, no, this is just like, take your time, have your voice heard. Like, let's work through it. Let's talk
Right.
about it. You lay it out and
I'm
let's
really proud
figure
of
it
that.
out, kind of thing.
I'm proud of
Without
you, and I'm proud of the
giving
guys in
anybody.
this group.
Oh, me too. I'm really
I
proud of
really
the
am.
guys in the group, man. I'm really proud of the guys in the group. They're fantastic. But
I'll tell
anyway,
you,
it,
mhm.
it happens like that. So what do we do? So let's talk about a little bit about if we can transition to, and we've talked a lot about what the effects are of
Yeah.
codependency. What do we do? What do we do, Nora, in order to get to, what have you done? What have I done in order to help with our obvious codependent tendencies that we've been gifted with?
I've just basically told everyone yes, and that I'll do it for them no matter what. No, I'm kidding.
That is kind of true in some
I
ways,
mean,
Nora.
it's a pattern, like, that's the thing, like, it's wired in there, and it's hard
Yeah,
to rewire, that's the
yeah,
thing. It's like, it's worth it to try and rewire him, but
sure.
it's like, it is work, and it is a process, and it doesn't just happen overnight, but
Yeah,
some of the things I was thinking about that of, like, quote, unquote, "how to heal codependency," if you will.
yeah.
Number 1 is you just have to continue building awareness around it, and how you are probably wired toward this, because I really don't think many people are not, like, wired this way.
No, I think most of them are, and I know we say, like, um, looking out for it is like the number one thing, and
Mm,
for everything, awareness is number one in everything, every episode we've ever done. But it's true. If you're unaware,
mhm,
you can't do anything about it.
right,
So
you
you
know,
got to start by taking a look at where this might be happening in your life, even if you don't think it is.
right,
Because it can be so subtle you don't know it, and then one day you go, "Oh, that's a
re
codependent relationship I'm
right.
having there." Or
Real quick,
yeah,
before we go into, like, this part of like, how to heal it, I also wanna
yeah,
bring something up, because we kinda touched on this earlier, and it's something that, like, this is one of my struggles, right?
okay,
Like, this
shoot,
is one of my struggles, and I know where it comes from, and I'm like, the more that I, like, become aware of it, the more I'm, like, seeing the roots of this, and I'm like, "Oh, right, this isn't for me to carry." But it kind of, you touched on it before. I saw this meme, and I was like, "Oh," it was like, "Well, shit." Like, it me.
that's
And
me.
it's
Yeah.
pretty funny, because it's funny because it was relatable for me, but it was a photo of this guy walking up the steps out of a New York City subway station onto the
Uh,
street, and he's carrying, like, a big washing machine by himself up these
uh,
steps out of the subway, and the words that were written were, it was something along the lines of, like, hyper independence is a sign of childhood trauma.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I was like, "Well, shit," right? 'Cause
Nah, that's
it's
me.
it's 100% me, and it's
Yeah.
100%, like, comes from basically what the messaging I took in a
Mhm.
lot of ways, that comes from a lot of my father, well, both sides of my mother's side of the family and my
You
father's
want
side of the
something
family.
done, you gotta
Do
do
it
it
yourself.
yourself. Yeah,
Right, exactly, right, and, like, also, like, don't be a burden, and if
yeah,
you wanna get it done, do it you're gonna have to do it yourself. You can't rely on other people to, like, because they're gonna disappoint you,
right. Yeah,
essentially.
yeah.
And it's very hard for me to ask for help,
Mhm.
because the times I have asked for help and people didn't show up, it feels like it's a big deal for me to like, it feels very vulnerable for me to ask for help.
Yeah,
And when people are like, "Yeah, I will," and they don't show up, or they're like, "Meh," and they drop the ball, or they just, like, there's some to do about it, and they basically don't show up for me.
You
it
go
feels like,
running right back to severe independence mode. Yeah.
well, yeah, it erodes trust. It
Yeah.
erodes that I can trust them, right?
Yeah.
And like that's tough, right? And so a lot of times it's just like, well, I'm just gonna do it myself, right?
Right.
And I, I'm gonna end up like I'm not getting any younger and I can't do this shit. Or like,
Right. Yeah.
like nor
Yeah.
should
Yeah.
I, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And
Nor should
certainly we should say that
Gen X,
generationally that is a very Gen X
trauma
thing.
responsive Gen X
A
thing, right?
very,
Like
very common trauma
100%.
responsive Gen X because we were left alone, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And yeah,
exactly.
yeah, we were
And
left
also
alone a lot.
told not
So
to be burdens.
right,
Right?
yeah,
Like,
a lot.
that's the other thing is, like, don't get in the way, don't be burdens, like, the adults are having a hard time, and
Right,
again, our parents were doing the best they could with what they
right,
had, but also and they were doing better than their parents were,
yeah,
and in the ways that I hope that we as a generation are doing better than our parents, but, like, there's always gonna be mistakes, but why I think younger generations, the perspective that might help them with their own parents is that Gen X did not have the tools of hyperconnection with the internet, YouTube, all of
hmm
the way TikToks, all these things of like you can look up therapists online and find out like this that was not a thing for our
no,
parents and it became a thing later on for us. Right? So the digital natives, generations have to realize that these tools were not available. They didn't exist yet,
right,
right? So it's
yeah.
like they weren't invented, that didn't exist yet. So everyone was doing the best they could with the information that they had. And
Which was so little information, by the way. Like
exactly.
you really had to look for it, y'all. I mean, listen, the amount of stuff about mental health just on social media these days
Mm,
is
it's
more
enormous.
is millions of times more than any. And I'm just talking about memes and stuff, not real
Mhm.
articles
Right.
written by doctors. I'm just talking about how much people are generally talking about it. A, we didn't talk about it. B, it was really
Uh-huh.
hard to find information about. C, whether there was a huge stigma around going to a therapist when we were
Right.
younger.
Like you were weak or
Yeah,
some
like
shit,
you're a week or something like that. It just it
Mhm.
wasn't a really a thing,
Yep. Yep.
and and it was expensive and it was hard to
Mhm.
find a therapist and it was hard to use your insurance to get a therapist back then
Which
too.
is
So
also still the case these days, but I
yeah,
also wanna
yeah,
say, like, outside of, like, okay, if you don't have the means to find a therapist or afford a therapist, I understand that. But can you get a library card and pick out some books on these topics?
right,
Can
yeah,
you go on YouTube and look up stuff on this? Can you, like, get on social media and look up different therapists that are most likely those answers are yes. So still have more tools than past generations ever did have, right?
yeah.
And so
And remember, there are a lot of interns out there who are trying to get their hours in, right?
yeah.
That you probably can have access to for a lot less money
Yep.
than licensed clinical social workers. But these
Right. Or
people are
doctors too.
almost
Mhm.
licensed clinical social workers, are almost psychologists. So I mean,
They're like yoga teachers in training,
yeah,
like,
exactly, yeah,
yeah, so the resources are out there if you think a little more creatively other than like, "Well, I can't afford a therapist."
right, yeah,
Okay, go get a library card.
yeah.
You can get one for free, and you can get these books out, and you can read them, and try to help
Oof.
yourself in that way.
As an ex-library assistant, I
Yeah,
have
I
to
just
hold myself back from like saying anything more because I can go on for like an hour and a half about libraries and what
they're
they
the
do
best.
for people, and they
Oh
are
my god, I love a library.
literally the best.
They are the best.
We must never leave our libraries. We must
No.
always save our libraries. But
Every time I've moved somewhere, one of the first things I've done is gotten a library
yeah,
card, like,
yeah.
there yeah.
Yeah,
So you
tremendous
have
amount of resources, and not only that. Let me just say one thing about
yeah,
libraries,
please.
right? So
Please do.
there are research librarians within libraries, right? There's the main
Mhm.
circulation desk when you walk in. Probably not any research librarians there, but there's a desk for them in most every library, and their job is to help you find the resources that you need to connect with what you need to connect with, right?
Mm.
That's their only job. So you can walk up to a research librarian and say, I need the best things about codependence that you can find, or I need the best things about this or that. And they will go through and they will find all the, including articles, other things like
Mm.
that. I mean, they're incredible. I mean, one of the research librarians at the Oakland Public Library, this woman's husband was about to pass away who had dementia, but one thing he loved was this salmon dish that she cooked like 15 years ago and she lost the recipe.
Oh.
This woman found the recipe and she was able to make it for her husband before he died. And so I mean, that's just like,
Oh, my heart.
yeah, it took like a week. It
Oh,
took like a week
man.
for her to find it, but she found it.
Oh,
And yeah, I mean,
that's
so
amazing.
that's the kind of but that's the kind of,
Level of
lengths
yeah, mhm.
that a research librarian will go to because otherwise they're not doing That's their job, is to help you connect the public with resources, right?
Yes.
So take advantage of your research librarians, because they will help you get to where you need to go. And that includes filling out forms and stuff like that you don't understand or aren't familiar with. They're familiar with all of those forms, housing, employment, all kinds of things, right? So take advantage of that library, man. That card is a world opener for you.
Also, literacy, man.
Yeah.
Like,
Also read
there's
books,
freedom and literacy, right? Like that, it really, like,
But books are only a part of what libraries do, though. There's a lot more resources available to you, and they can probably even connect you with somebody who can connect you with a counselor that could be affordable for you. So, I mean, there's a lot of things.
Even if you don't go to your local branch, like, I have the Libby app, and my card is, and I just get books sent to my Kindle all the time.
100%.
Me
too.
Like, you don't
Books,
have to leave your
movies,
house.
music, all that stuff.
All of it free.
All right.
So
library over, but
hit up your library.
Hit up your library
rep.
for
Exactly.
sure. Yeah.
Show some love to your librarians.
Yeah.
They deserve it.
So what? Go ahead.
I can't remember. I think I was going on about just like the part of the thing. I think I'm like, what I was going back to with the whole, like, don't be a burden, and also, like, if you DIY, if you want to get it done, you're gonna have to do it yourself. Stems from, like, basically like an attachment thing where I learned, from family trauma, essentially, of, like, handed down through each generation, is, like, essentially in that attachment is, like, if you are a burden, you're not going to receive the care and the love.
Yeah.
Not that that's actually the case, but that's the message I picked up as a kid that wired me, that it's like, okay, you're gonna have to do it yourself. You're gonna have to, like, don't make things harder for your parents who are, like, struggling in these ways right now, and, like, just keep it to yourself and suppress any kind of needs and emotion,
Right.
which is a form of people pleasing, right? Like,
Yeah.
there it is, right? So if this sounds familiar to you and yourself, you're not alone. Like, most people struggle with some version of this, whether they realize it or not. But getting back to what we were saying, is the first step to this is building awareness around this, of, like, being able to take the observational view, like we always talk about how this is showing up in your life and your relationships, and then trying to, like, build awareness about where that's actually rooted, and if that's for you to really carry anymore. If that's most likely, the answer is going to be no. Most likely it's going to be, oh, my parents were going through their stuff, that they suppressed their shit, or they were, like, detached because of, down the line of intergenerational stuff.
Yeah.
So that's what I was going to say. The next step, I think, is building healthy boundaries. Learning where you and the other person begins, and being able to put a boundary there, so that you're not so enmeshed in other people, in your relationships with other people, that if they are getting rid of the need to control them through, like, how they're living their life or how they're feeling,
Right.
that it is not yours to carry.
Let me wedge in one more thing in between those
Please
two
do.
things, if I can, right?
Yes,
Which is,
please.
what can I control, right? So
100%.
that if you assess what you can control before you go to the boundaries, you're going to have a lot better time of setting boundaries, right? So the things you can control are your thoughts, your actions, your feelings, your opinions, your words, your playful behaviors, your general behavior, your ideas. And you're only ever in control of yourself, obviously. And the problem with this loop that we're in as codependents, right, is we worry way too much about other people's triggers, other people's thoughts, other people's opinions, other people's behaviors, all that stuff. So let's get clear that the only things you can control are your stuff first. Now we get to the boundary step.
Well, adding on to that is, like, when you can do that, what you're saying is learning what you can control, which is only ever your response.
Right. Yeah.
Then you become less reactive to other people, and you become more responsive, right?
Yeah.
And so Mel Robbins, who runs a very popular podcast, she is also an author, and she's coming out with a book that I have not read yet, so I don't really know it yet, but I've heard her talking about it. And one of the things, the book, I think, is called, like, the let them theory. And really, it's kind of a brilliant breakdown where it's like, let them say what they're going to say, do what they're going to do.
Right.
And then the other side of that is, now let me.
Right.
Right. And, like, I think that's a brilliant way to frame what we're talking about, is, like, instead
Flesh
of
that out a little bit more. So could you put that in an example form?
I'll try to.
Yeah.
So an example would be like, I don't like how this person who I deeply love and care for is living their life, and I'm
Mhm.
trying to get in there and tell them what they need to do and maybe organizing their shit or, like,
Right.
going in and, like, just like,
So instead, you just let them be
let
disorganized or
them.
whatever.
Let
Let them
them and
behave the way they are.
let them, like and, like, the power comes in of, like, now let them do what they're gonna do, and now let me respond by not engaging in that
Uh-huh.
and keeping my peace, or let me now share my feelings about it and then just let the chips fall where they're gonna
Mhm.
fall,
Right.
and, like, if they're going to be reactive about it, let them be reactive, but I don't have to react to their reaction. I can just be like, "Okay, but I'm going to have my boundary about where you end and I begin,"
Yeah,
right? So, like, it's not this feedback loop of 2 people trying to manipulate each other, essentially, without knowing it.
exactly.
Does that make sense? I don't know if
Yeah,
that's
it
a
makes
great.
total sense. One example maybe from my life is that, my mom had this real sort of passive aggressive way of asking for things to get done
Mhm.
if she thought here's the cycle goes like this. Something gets in her craw and bothers her, whether that's like, I don't know, the time that the cans are out on the street or,
Mhm.
boxes that need to be crushed or whatever, and then that builds and builds and builds in her till something needs to be done about it. She can't do it, and so then she says, something like, "Sure, would be nice if somebody crushed those boxes," or something really annoying like that, right?
Mhm.
You're just like,
You're like, "Just tell it to me."
right. So that's the boundary I set with her, right? I was like,
Mhm.
I'm not going to do anything for you if you ask me in a passive aggressive way like that. The best way you can ask me to do that is, can you crush those boxes today? And I will either tell you I will do it now or I will do it at this particular time, but I will do it and I will do it every time. But if I can't do it at the moment, I'll do it in the future. And so we have that agreement now, and that boundary has worked really well. She still slips and does that every once in a while, and I'll say passive aggressive, and she'll be
Yep.
like, "Oh, okay. Can you put the cans on the street before 7 or whatever,"
Right.
because she's nervous about it, right? The last thing that I want to do is acquiesce to these requests simply because she thinks they need to be done at a certain time, right? So I have
Mhm.
that boundary as well there, right? I'm not just going to run and jump every time she wants something to be done because it's bothering her personally, right?
Mhm. I
But I will get it done as long as she follows those guidelines about how to ask me, right?
well, I think that's exactly you're touching on something. I think when we think of boundary, we think of a fence, right? And we've talked
Yeah,
about this before. Maybe a better framework of imagining what boundaries really are guardrails of it's teaching people how you will accept like what you will accept of how you will be treated and
yeah,
spoken to and whatnot. And it's putting guardrails around that of like, okay, you I will accept from you if you ask me in a respectful way
yeah,
and, give me a choice in the matter. What I won't do is sense that you are not satisfied with a certain thing of how I'm doing it or not doing it, and then have that dictate to me like a puppeteer
right.
of like how I'm
Yeah,
gonna respond to it. That's no longer gonna work for me.
yeah,
So think of them as guardrails of like you may or may not talk to me in this tone, you may or may not, and like here are the consequences that if you continue to do that. Like I've
yeah,
literally done that to like to a family member a while back who called at me and was like really upset and like just getting more upset and yelling into the phone. And I kept saying, if you keep this tone with me, I'm gonna hang up.
right.
And I gave them 3 attempts, and then finally I hung up. It
Hmm.
was just like, it's like, you gotta teach people what you will and will not accept in
You
your
gave him
life.
3. That was pretty generous.
I
Yeah.
know, it was very
I
generous of
like
me.
this guy. I like this guardrail thing. Man, kind of like I like to think of it like the drunk bumps that are next to
Yeah,
the when
exactly.
you veer out of a lane. You're just like,
Yep,
okay, well, I veered out of the lane of acceptable behavior, and now I'm into this. Now I'm into this where
yep,
and that that those drunk bumps are the boundary, and and then it gets brought up. You need to get back in your lane. Stay out
yep,
of my lane. You know.
yep. Exactly, exactly. So I mean, that's how I'm trying to reframe and think about that stuff.
Gotcha.
So boundaries is an enormous one. Do you
Hmm.
have anything else to add towards like
No, I just think I think boundaries are so important, and so few people have good ones
Mhm.
that I think that's if we were to leave it here, I would say that that's the number
Mm,
one thing I would want people to work on would be boundaries, and that's the number one thing that I'm constantly working on is having strong yet flexible yet caring and loving boundaries around things, right?
yes.
Not
Yep.
there's a couple ways to do it, right? Don't get into the my way or the highway thing where it's like
Right.
you
The
don't give anybody
dictator.
any chances to
Yeah.
do anything. Like
Yeah.
when you set a boundary, you've changed the way that you're relating to somebody else, right? So you have
Yep.
to give them time to get used to that boundary being in place. They're going to make mistakes. You can't then just fly off the handle and say, I told you, I set a boundary. I told you. It doesn't work like that. They
Yeah.
need to be flexible. You need to be able to bring people back to their lane without getting in a fight about it or being upset about it,
Right. Well, one of the other things I just thought of that I think is important is building awareness around your gut instinct and how, like, getting in touch with how your emotions are manifesting in your body and the reaction in your body and what those emotions are and
Yeah.
what it is. Like, I have a very strong sense of like like intuition and gut instinct stuff. Like, and I don't think of intuition as like this magical mystical ability. Although, if you want to think of it like that, I mean, I'm not going to tell you no. I think of it as like my neural network is so interconnected in terms of reading the people in my life, the situations in my life, of constantly looking at, am I safe? Am I safe in this world? And building this neural network of really subconsciously finding the details in my environment
Yeah.
of whether I'm safe or not, that it almost feels like it feels like magic where it's like I just have this gut instinct that I'm not safe, or I have a gut instinct that I am safe, or
Mhm.
like I have a gut instinct about these things. And it's because my neural network is like fucking just sorry, I didn't mean to curse there, but
No, I
my
liked
neural
it. I
network
liked it. Give
no,
it the
it's just
emphasis. Put it down, Nora. Come
it's
on.
basically it's like hyper
Preach.
connecting like my environment, like it's taking in a ton of information and like parsing it of what and processing it, that it just feels like something's going on here. What is it? And getting to the point where I can like identify what that is, right? And so practice paying attention to yourself in that way so that you can get to know what your emotions are, what your inner state is, what your authentic self is, because I think so many people grow up having to suppress that they don't get to know who they are and how they feel about things. And then they are just like their sense of self is just not there. They're
Yeah.
looking towards outwardly to find like definition of who they are and how they feel about the world.
Yeah. And there's no happiness there.
No,
That's the
there's
thing,
no
right?
power
Is
in
that
that. There's no
this is why the super rich are not happy.
mhm.
I mean, generally, as a rule, they always need to be doing, if you
More,
just
more,
look at
more.
them, I mean, more all the time, acquiring more all the time. And if they were ever satisfied, then they would have stopped a long time ago.
Right.
It's
If
like
it was enough, enough would be enough. They would know where enough is.
they would know where enough is, but because of their trauma, they don't know where enough
Mhm.
is. Because of their
Well, it's the same with
codependence, they don't know
addicts.
where enough. Same with addicts. I mean,
I
it's
mean,
all
it's similar,
addiction.
right,
It's all
all of
addiction
it.
one way or another. All of it.
Yeah, all of it is the same root. So
Yeah.
again, get to know yourself in that way, so that you can pay attention to your inner world, so that your outer world can reflect back to you.
Yeah, and
Because it
I
is
want to shoot
regardless.
for contentment. I don't want to shoot for wealth. I mean, wealth is
No,
good.
yeah,
Wealth is great. Wealth is fantastic, but it's only a tool, and like contentment is the thing. And I mean, take Jim Carrey. You look at after he had his awakening. I mean,
mhm,
he's begging people. Like this is not it. Like I have
yeah,
millions of dollars, and I'm telling you, this is not it. But because we don't have millions of dollars, we think, yeah, sure, Jim. Right.
right,
Yeah. It's easy for you to say with lots of millions of dollars, but it truly isn't it. This is why lottery winners crash. This is
yep.
why, wealthy people continue to stay at work way too long and stay away from their families and all. It's this weird grind culture that we're in. Like,
Well,
stop
that's
paying
also an
attention to
addiction.
that shit. Yeah. It's also what? An
Grind culture
addiction.
is an
Oh
addiction,
yeah, for
right? It's
sure.
like,
Yeah, for sure.
I get my value from if I produce these things and
Right.
all
So,
that
I mean,
stuff. It's all interrelated.
in your analysis, if you're new to this and looking for codependent behavior and you're cruising around YouTube and you're watching a video with Elon Musk or somebody else like that on it, like start to analyze it. Like,
Yep.
what are they saying? Where do you think that comes from? Where do you think that idea comes from? Do you
Mhm.
think it's just a good idea that they learned somewhere, or do you think this is coming from some kind of behavior,
Subconscious
some
shit.
kind of attachment shit that they had
Yeah,
in their childhood? And a lot of the time, it's that attachment shit they had in their childhood. They're not
yeah,
happy people.
right.
I mean, it goes for all of celebrity. They thought celebrity would make them happy. They thought money
Mhm.
would make them happy. And
Fame,
how
attention,
many lasting marriages are there in Hollywood?
oh,
How many
man.
happy people are there who are actors? How many, I mean, it
How
just
many
goes on and
whole
on and
people?
on.
Yeah.
How many of these people who claim to have the answer, like Jordan Peterson, are really happy people? I don't think Jordan Peterson's very happy. I mean, not to totally shit on everybody. I don't mean to shit on everybody, but you know what I mean?
Storm, dude.
I just see so much unhappiness, though, amongst these people who claim to have the answer to what you should be doing in your life. A lot of these people are more unhappy than you probably are now. They just have more money and more of a platform,
Right.
It's like, stop. I
Dictating
got to
to other
remind
people
myself
what
of
they-
this.
yeah.
Yes, stop looking at these, quote unquote heroes on social media and stuff like that. I mean, does it ever happen where 10 years down the road that there's somebody who was absolutely lauded for their intelligence and fame and all the other stuff, there's some dark secret that happens 10 years down the road and then they get canceled or something, right? I mean, it's just like it's a never ending like cycle of like disappointment in these heroes that we gin up, but it's our thing. I mean, we make them famous.
They make the pedestal
because we make the pedestal. We have this hunger. Something outside of us is the answer. Something outside of us is always the answer, and it's not. It's what's inside is the answer. You only
get to know your inside, man.
Get to know your inside. You only need that. You don't need these people telling you what to do. You don't need us telling you what to do.
Especially the woman that told me that I shouldn't move to Philly because that was beneath Chicago.
Yeah.
F off, lady.
She can suck
I will fight you. I actually am not going to fight her, but but there is the feral Gen Xer in me that is like, I will fight you.
Yeah, you obviously still care about it 15 years later or whatever.
I don't. I just find it was yet another example of like, I'm like, wow, the people are really wrapped up in their own, like they think their vision of success is everyone's.
Yeah. Hey, including us though, right? Including us. I mean, we're all, I'm not, this is not the podcast that you listen to for, hey, they've got all the answers.
Yeah.
we're like,
absolutely not.
we are doing the saying that I absolutely hate, which is building the plane while flying it. But,
there it is.
But there it is all the time.
Well, Paul, we are a little over an hour now. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to add to this?
No,
discussion?
I think it's good. Again, awareness, boundaries, all those things, and just start looking for it. Because when you start looking for it, you see it everywhere.
Right. But that's the thing. When you build awareness around that, then you can take proper action and proper boundaries,
right.
and also compassion for other people when you see, oh, this is something this is about them and not about me.
Yeah.
Right.
And yes, absolutely. And go back and listen to our episode on boundaries if you're wondering about that, because it talks about how to set different kinds of boundaries. And the different kind of boundaries, there are physical boundaries, psychological boundaries, energetic boundaries, space boundaries. All of those things are contained in that episode. That's in season 1. So go back and listen to that.
Awesome.
Well, Paul, we do a lot. I love you too, Nora. I love you too. Thanks for being with us, everybody. We really appreciate your patronage, of course. And if you have any, if you want to give us a review on Apple Podcasts, that would be fantastic, of course. And you want to share this with your friends, that would also be fantastic.
If you want to write us too with any feedback or questions or suggestions for future like podcasts.
Yep. It's if we only knew then pod@gmail.com. And that address will be again at the end of the show.
Last thing, I am in the midst of setting up an account on Blue Sky for us. So if you're on Blue Sky, or if you only knew then, I think at .bsky, whatever the handles are. But yes, you can find us there.
Great endorsement, Nora.
I know, isn't that great? It's wonderful.
One of this new social platform. The address is whatever.
Yeah, just look at it.
Just whatever. Just like go look on there. I'm sure there aren't anybody. I'm sure nobody else is on there yet, so you'll find us.
Nailed it.
Hilarious. This is the marketing genius of this podcast coming to the surface again.
We need help, y'all.
Yeah. Listen or don't, like whatever.
That's so Gen X.
So Gen X. We don't care. Yeah. We don't care if you listen.
We do. We care about you. But anyway.
We care a lot.
All right, Paul. I love you, listeners.
I love you too, Nora.
See you next one.
See you next time, listeners. Bye.
Freedom over fame. Freedom over cycle stays the same.
If you'd like to get in touch with us about anything you've heard on the show, you can drop us an email at ifweonlyknewthenpod@gmail.com.